Hello. I wanted to put together a series of video demo type videos just so it was a bit clearer in terms of what the new Veeam NAS backup looks like. Easier than just copying a load of screenshots and putting that into a load of blog posts. I think we'll get more benefit of actually running through a couple of video demos. First of all, this one is going to cover off the overview of NAS backup, why now type thing, as well as the components that we have and how easy it is to set that up. Then we're going to get into a bit deeper into the change file tracking and how the file and folder structure looks and what it feels like under the hood, if you like. Then I also want to touch on some specific integrations around snapshots. So how do we leverage those production like storage snapshots with the likes of NetApp, Dell EMC, etc. How that works from a NAS backup point of view within Veeam. And then probably most importantly is the recovery scenarios. How do we look there in terms of how do we recover, what do we recover, and how quickly can we recover? And then I want to get to probably the last and most interesting one for me is around, okay, so I've shown you, I will show you everything from a UI perspective. I'll show you everything from that we've just touched on, but then I also want to touch on how do we do this from PowerShell? How do we automate some of these tasks? And then if we've got time, I want to go into a bit more around resilience and how we leverage some resiliency around our scale out backup repository in terms of how we store that data. So from an introduction point of view, why NAS, why now? Probably the most important thing is that Veeam don't just tick a box. We want to actually innovate into the market and do something different. So we've had as an advantage, that means we've had the last 10 years to look at how NAS is being protected. The disadvantage is well, we're only bringing something to market now, but to couple those together, the advantages and disadvantages is, well, because we know the disadvantages in the market around slow backups, potentially leveraging NDMP based backup tools, it takes a long time, so we knew that we had to bring out something that was much faster in regards to being able to take that full backup on day one, but then being able to take incremental backups very fast and efficiently on days 2, 3, and 4 without the requirement of ever having to go back and take that full backup again. That's probably the key factor of that. But also we needed to stick to some of our mantras within Veeam. Things like, well, we need to keep it simple. We need to keep it within the same Veeam backup replication wizard-driven approach that allows our existing customers, to just pick this up and start protecting their NAS workloads. Then we also need to look at being agnostic. One of the key differentiators for Veeam is that we're software only, but we're also agnostic to any particular hardware. And this was one of the key points in not only as to where we back up our NAS backups to, but also what NAS source can we protect. So I want to get into that as to a bit more about what we can protect, and then also being snapshot friendly. A lot of the larger enterprises out there that have NAS footprints are probably running them on something like a NetApp ONTAP system, a Dell EMC 1FS, or Hitachi HNAS. They're the common three that I hear about, but there's loads out there that are enterprise grade NAS devices, and this is where they're storing their unstructured data. Now, it would be amiss of us if we didn't have something that we could leverage their snapshot technology, their storage efficient snapshot technology. So I'll go into a lot more detail in another video around that. Anyway, that's enough of me talking about the introduction to NAS and why now and what we're doing. Hopefully it all becomes a bit clearer as to what we're doing different in the market as we walk through this. So quick video to really just show what it looks like from an interface point of view. So as I said, it's all within Veeam backup replication. There is some Veeam 1 stuff that I'll try and get another video on to show you some of the monitoring and reporting that we do there. We'll see if we can bolt that onto the end of this. But simply put, is if we jump over to our inventory, you'll see we've got this file shares tab. This is where you're going to find all your virtualization, you're going to find your physical, but also now your file shares. This is within version 10 of the product. So if we go up to add file share, we've got the capability or the ability to run or add our file server, whether it be Windows or Linux, the ability to run NFS shares or SMB. So just for an example, I've got my share here over on it's on a Windows machine, but it's still going over the SMB protocol. So I want to just show how simple it is to add this. So if I add that in there, we want to make sure that we've got the appropriate access permissions into that. This needs to be read as a minimum. Obviously from a restore point of view, and we'll try and go through those as we go through the video series. We choose an account, the credentials that have that read access. Then down here you've got advanced. Now on SMB we have the ability to leverage backup directly from the file share. This is the simplest form of being able to get that data from A to B as quick as possible. It means that any locked files, so any Word documents or any unstructured file that's opened, potentially that is locked, we will not be able to back that up, and we will have to keep retrying that until it's available. Second option is being able to back up from a Microsoft VSS snapshot. So this is going to allow us to actually take a VSS snapshot, which means that all of those locked files are now no longer locked because we're going to leverage that VSS snapshot as the source. This requires SMB3, which hopefully most of you out there are using that as a version of SMB or newer. And then the final one, and this is where I'm going to have a dedicated video or demo on this, is backup from a storage snapshot of the following path. Now this gives us the ability to leverage those storage snapshots, but also secondary storage snapshots or replicated storage snapshots as a source. So it might be a completely different shared folder that we're taking the snapshot from. And then there's a failover tick box which is in there by default down below, which is failover to direct backup if a snapshot is not available. So we definitely want a backup, so let's fail back to a particular way of being able to do that. So next up, we've got two new concepts, or one and a half, right? So file proxy. Now file proxy, in exactly the same fashion with our VMware proxies, is our data mover. It's the muscles that move data from A to B. And the caveat here is that this needs to be Windows. You know that in version 10 we released the ability to use VMware Linux proxies for hot add mode to be able to use a different operating system there. The actual NAS backup, the file proxy must be Windows. So we've got the ability to run through there and select the ones that we want, or we can say use any available proxy. Now this really comes into its own when you've got a distributed environment where you may have proxies in different locations, but your management server lives in one. We may want to be more selective in which proxies actually do that movement of data. In my lab, it's just one. Then we have the concept of a cache repository. Now this cache repository is where we're going to keep all of the changes since the last backup, in very easily put. And again, I'll go into more detail about what this actually means and looks like in that next video around change file tracking and file and folder structure. This just needs to be a simple repository. By simple repository, what I mean is this should be direct attached storage. This could be SAN, NAS, but it should be as close to that production NAS as possible. And this is going to contain those changes since the last backup. And then we've got the concept of backup IO control. Again, those familiar with Veeam from a virtualization point of view, we have backup IO control, which limits the amount of impact that we have on the production system. Backup IO control in the NAS is exactly the same. So if you've got a low-end NAS, then you may want to tweak this more to the left, because we're going to lower the impact down into how much CPU, how much memory we take from that production NAS. But if you've got an enterprise-ready, high-grade enterprise NAS, then you probably can move that up to the right. I fully expect this to be more blended, like the VMware backup IO control, to be more of an automated approach, but that's not me putting my my hat on anything on this, but just for the purpose of the demo, I'm going to leave it in the middle. This is really determining, and there'll be sizing as well that also comes out of this, how we size those cache repositories, file proxies, and also that backup IO control. And as simple as that, we then add that share in. So very simple stuff, very easy wizard-driven approach. You can see that I've got a few down here already. So you can see that I've got 3 SMB shares already added to my VBR server. I've also got an NFS share presented from a system, and then I've got a couple of Windows servers. I've got the actual VBR server itself already added, but then also another Windows server that's providing shares out to my demo business, if you like. So okay, so we touched on adding the share, we touched on backup IO control very briefly, we touched on the advanced settings, and of which I'll cover more so later on, the snapshot repository. Sorry, the ability to leverage storage snapshots, as well as the cache repository. So next up is having another look at those file proxies. So under backup infrastructure, if we go under backup proxies here, you're going to see what proxies we have. Now, you'll see as well a double up because, well, in my lab, I'm running VMware for the most part. I'm running some NAS, as you've seen, but I also need to back up my virtual machine. So I have a range of Windows proxies that will allow me to take VMware snapshots, VMware backups from that virtual estate. I can also couple those same proxies and use them as my file proxies as well. So if we jump into one of these, they're very simple, is that we're going to choose the server. We've already added this as a managed server. We've got a description if we want to add that. And then we've got the concurrent tasks. This is based on CPUs. So again, in exactly the same way as we do with our virtual machine proxy, we can up these. So we can see that there's 4 cores in here. As soon as we go to 5, we get a warning. And this just means how many concurrent tasks can this proxy achieve at any given time. What we can also do here is network traffic rules in terms of, right, well, I need to make sure that we encrypt the traffic. We want to throttle back any resources or any network speed that we have, and when do we want to do that. Then we got a reviewing and then an apply. Simple as, again, very simple. If you've used Veeam before, you know exactly how easy that is to get that up and running. So next up is how easy is it to create an actual backup job. So under here, and this is another feature that we don't talk about enough. So I have a lot of jobs, obviously from a demo point of view, that I have in place. But if I just want to search by a particular job or a policy, then I've got the ability to quickly jump in there and have a look. So if I take one that I've got, again, those familiar with Veeam, you're going to see how very simple it is to run this. You've got your NAS backup name, you've got which files and folders. Now here you're going to see all of those shares that we've just created. So anything that we've created that's got the ability to be backed up, we can add that in here. You can see that I've got a mixture of NFS, we've got some SMB, all of them ones that were initially added on there are in that place. You see our new one here. If we expand that, we get to see those files and folders that we had before. Also within here, and that could be multiple shares for multiple files and folders depending on what the policy is that you want to define against those. So we could have multiple SMB shares from multiple NAS devices all encompassed into this one backup job. And then from there, we've got the ability to do this exclusion, so file filters. So we can make sure that we only capture .xyz files, but also we could say, I don't want any MP3s, star.mp3, star.mp4s, etc. We can exclude them from that backup. Okay, this is where it gets interesting in terms of where do we back up this NAS backup. And the key thing to point out here is that the NAS backup file format is not the same as what we see from our image-based backups. So there's not a grouping of VBK files that you see from a NAS backup. NAS backup is very different, and again, we'll touch on that in the file and folder structure in the next video. But what we have here is the ability to choose a short-term backup repository. So this should be your very fast recovery point wherever you want that to be stored. It should be within the same data center, within the same region, or within the same site as your production workloads. And this is where we're going to define that simple repository or a dedupe device or just any DAS, NAS, SAN type environment that we want to store those backups for. And then how long do we want to keep those? How long do we want to keep those for? So we've got the ability to do it for days or months. And then this is optional. So you can choose to say, I want to keep even more file versions. And this is where we're going to tier off those file versions that fall out of that short-term retention now into a longer-term retention, archive repository. Now this archive repository, again, can be any of those aforementioned disk types, backup repositories that we mentioned. So simple, could be scale-out backup repositories, could be simple repositories in terms of dedupe devices, NAS, SAN, DAS, etc. But within the archive repository, this can actually be an object storage repository. And again, we can get even more granular on what we keep and what we don't. So if there was MP3s that we didn't want to store in that primary or in that short-term retention, but then you wanted to also exclude for longer-term retention ISOs or MP4s, etc., we can add that in here. We can also say about active file versions and deleted file versions. So if something's been deleted from that short-term, how long do we want to keep a version of that in our long-term retention? So it could enable you to really free up some space on that production NAS. Things like historic or archived ISO files. ISO files are never going to get dripped down because they never change, but they're taking up potentially a considerable amount of storage. So delete them from the primary once you've got that backup, and then let them tier into the archive repository, which is going to be cheaper, deeper, potentially more infinite storage. Then we've also got this, and I wanted to show this. So in exactly the same fashion that we have with our virtual machine backups, our image-based backups, we have this location tagging. So be aware that we will keep an eye on what locations you're keeping your backups, because more importantly, if we're taking a NAS backup from location 1 and we're sending them to location 2, in this instance I'm taking it from Columbus and I don't have any location tag on my repositories. I may not have one on my Exagrid or on my dedupe device or on my archive tier, which is my AWS S3. So just be aware of that. Do you want to proceed anyway? So yes, ignore that, but I just wanted to show that that's still a thing within NAS backup. Then with secondary targets, so think of this as another location for disaster recovery, for another retention of those NAS backups. Think about, so we've said about the short-term retention, that's going to live as close to your production NAS as possible. We're going to have to keep at least a minimum of 1 day, but we can scale that up to 30, 60, 90 days if you will need that, or even into months. What the secondary repository does is allow us to take a copy of that and have that on a secondary retention. So it can, by all means, be exactly the same repository. If I choose this one, for example, and go into edit, we can use a custom retention. So we can, if we leave it unticked, it's going to use exactly the same retention that we have in that primary, that short-term retention. Although if we want, we can keep anything up to days and months again. We can also have a separate data encryption set here as opposed to what was set on the original, and we can say when this can happen as well. But if I just jump back quickly to the previous, we've also got the advanced here. So one thing from a NAS point of view, we want to make sure that we keep all the right permissions, all the ACLs that we protect. So we, out of the box from a default point of view, we want that to be folder level only, but we have the ability to do it files and folders. Now just be aware that that's going to take a lot longer because we have to trawl through the whole file and folder structure to be able to get all of those permissions. From a storage point of view out of the box, we do offer compression. Now I'm going to try and do something around sizing as we move through this video series, as well as being able to add this encryption. So I've just touched on the secondary target. This could be a completely separate, or it is a completely separate backup file encryption that we use here. We've got things like health checks that can be performed against your backups, additional notifications, as well as things being embedded into Veeam 1. You may just want to get a simple email notification on what's happened, when it's happened, etc. And again, I'm going to go into this a little bit more. You'll see that I've got a script here that runs that just incrementally adds additional files so that we actually see some change rate. But think about those storage snapshot integrations. This is where we can define or tell the storage array to trigger a NAS snapshot, so that we can leverage that snapshot at the point in time, and it's called exactly the same snapshot every time, and we just say when we want that to happen. And this could also be used for additional tasks. It might be that there's a database file that we don't actually, it's a flat file database, but we need to make sure that the application coalesces that, and it could be that that script runs here before we're taking that back up. The endless amounts of scenarios could be added in here. So okay, so we touched on, there's that warning again about the location. We touched on the secondary target, and then again, those familiar with Veeam are going to absolutely understand this. This is the schedule. Very simple stuff. When do you want it to run? I've gone quite aggressive on this one. I want it to run on an hourly basis, but we can go to the dailies, we can go to monthlies after particular jobs. We want to automatically retry after amount of time for those lock files, for example, and we want to make sure that it's within our backup window, maybe if you need that to be the case. Finally, we get the summary, and it's going to tell you exactly what that is. It's also going to give you that command line, and we've had this for quite some time, but probably don't again shout about this enough. But if you wanted to incorporate this into a different pipeline, then we could absolutely add this to that from a command line point of view. And you can see here, if I double click on this, this is one of those machines. This is one of those NAS backups that have been running. So if I go back, you'll start to see, especially where I was playing with the incremental changes, you see that it's only 200 files. It's not a very big, it's my lab as well. But you get to see that the information that we're gathering, we're going to leverage all of these proxies. We can see that the source share size is 201 files. You can see that it's taking less than a minute. We can see that there's no changes. We're not having to change anything because nothing is incremental at that point. But if we went all the way back, and that would take quite some time because this has been running for a long time, but you'll see that first backup would have taken a little bit longer because it's having to work and go through the whole full file set. But then it's the incremental is the key part to this, and our key differentiator when it comes to our NAS backup. The other thing that I wanted to just finally touch on when I clear out this mess is Enterprise Manager. And again, I think there's a chance that we should probably dive into this in general, because there's quite a new look and feel of the console, especially with additional data around your file data. So over here in this widget, you'll see file data, you'll see the processing speed, you'll see the source size, you'll see how much are we backing up and how much are we dropping into that archive tier. You can see obviously everything else was there before. You might see some name change. I don't think this was called image data pre-version 10. I think this may be called virtual machine data or VM data. So, and then the status of backups. But what this allows us to do is actually perform searches against those file shares. Gives us a report against those. So yeah, under files, if we go here, we've then got the ability to select all of our different objects that we have in there. Now we can filter these so that I don't have my virtual machines and I only have my file shares, which is still a long list. but we've also got the ability to, maybe I know that it's on DC1, so it's only going to show all of them. I know that I want to show you particular files that I have within NAS backup. Let's mount all of those. And this Enterprise Manager can live locally within the Veeam backup replication server, or it can be a component that's stored elsewhere. Now, if we want to do a search in here, so I know that there's some files called community. You can see that I've got one version of that file. Now from here, we can actually select it. We've got the ability to overwrite it and push it back. So this, bearing in mind, is a web interface, not a UI like you see within Veeam Backup Replication. We've got also the capability of being able to download or even add it to something that I've been calling a shopping list. So add it to a restore list, find all the folders that you want. That's going to then allow you to download it into a compressed file, and then you can ship it out back to your user. Being able to search, you don't have to do it over. Say if you've got many different NAS backups or NAS sources, and it might be that I need to find everything that has the word John Smith in. We could actually search across the whole or all of the backups. But I think that we could probably go into a lot more detail around what this looks like. I've mentioned around Veeam 1 as well, that's going to give us some good insight into what's happening, what our file proxies are doing, if we need more, if we need less, if we don't need as many, kind of thing. Yeah, we're going to get into a lot more of that detail as we walk through this series. But hopefully that was useful. Leave any comments below, and find me on Twitter at MichaelCade1. I'm really responsive there. But with that, cheers guys. Thank you.